Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor, and today we are continuing our Narnia series with the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And with me back to discuss is Joseph Pearce. Joseph Pearce is an author and a professor and has written many books on Tolkien, Belloc, C.S. Lewis, as well as Narnia. Further up, further in is a book that he wrote that really inspired a lot of this series. And you can find his work at jpearce.co. And the link is in the description. And you can find a bunch of different ways of finding his work there. Joseph, welcome back to the show. It's really great to see you.
It's good to be back with you, Connor. Thanks for having me.
So we're talking about the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I named the episode From Fabian Socialist to Catechumen. I think that sums up Eustace's storyline in this book. What is your first thoughts about that?
I think it's a great title, and I think you're correct. One aspect of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader is Eustace's journey from basically a materialistic atheism and progressive socialism to an embrace ultimately through suffering and humility of the existence of God, specifically, of course, as manifested in the Chronicles of Narnia, the existence and belief in the power of Aslan.
Now, for modern readers or current readers, I should say, probably won't understand when they're like looking at Eustace's parents and understanding what they represent, especially because it's really about the time period they're living in. So what is Eustace's parent? What do they represent? What kind of lifestyle are they living? Because they're wearing special underwear. What is this?
Yeah, so again, this is key. There's to read literature well. One of the tools you need to have at your disposal is the ability to see intertextuality when it presents itself to you. So to explain very briefly what that is, intertextuality is when an author in his own work refers to something beyond his own work, usually another text. Now that's not strictly true of a particular text in this case. It's true of he's alluding to a particular person. So again, the clue is the underwear. Now this is it's important because if you don't know the intertextual connection, you'll think that's just odd. Why mention underwear in this context, and what's that got to do with anything? Well, of course, it has a great deal to do with everything, and that's why it's important for us to know it. So, for C.S. Lewis's generation, in fact, it's older than Lewis. When Lewis was writing the Chronicles of Narnia, George Bernard Shaw was an old man. George Bernard Shaw is really of Chesterton's generation, and indeed even older than Chesterton. But he was a huge influence in the 1890s through to basically went to the 1950s. So when Lewis is writing this, certainly George Bernard Shaw is an old man who'd been a major influence on British culture and indeed Anglophone culture, English-speaking culture around the world for about 60 years. So he's a grand old man, a sort of in some sense we might even pretend to say a Gandalf figure, except he's not preaching wisdom but stupidity. George Bernard Shaw was one of the founders of the Fabian Socialist movement. So the socialists were effectively Marxists, so followers of the doctrines of Karl Marx. They were around before the Russian Revolution, so before the lessons that Bolshevism had to teach us. But Bernard Shaw basically taught a progressive form of socialism rooted in materialism, in other words, atheism, and in particular also Nietzscheanism. He was a follower of the philosophies of Friedrich Nietzsche, and for Nietzsche, there's no such thing as a good or evil. There's no such thing as objective truth. It's all about the power of the will. It's about the will. But one thing that we know that Eustace's parents are followers of Fabian socialism in general, and George Bernard Shaw in particular, is this reference to the underwear. Because for Lewis's readership, they would know immediately and smile and maybe laugh out loud when they realized that this is an allusion to George Bernard Shaw. Because Bernard Shaw, amongst his other things, he was a teetotaler, he was a non-smoker, he was a vegetarian. He's actually very puritanical in many ways about all sorts of things. An early proponent of what we would now call the cancel culture, basically stopping people from doing anything of which you disapprove. Doing or saying anything. He supported Joseph Stalin well after it became clear that Stalin was killing millions of his own people. So he was so intent on having his socialist utopianism become reality, he was happy to turn a blind eye to the killings of millions of people. But the underwear was, amongst his many weird ideas, was that there was a German professor called Jaeger who taught that that to wear fabrics close to your skin, such as cotton or leather or silk, was harmful to the health. This was the days before the various plastic materials that we wear today. So the only healthy thing to wear close to your skin was wool. So Jaeger underwear, which became a designer brand, was woolen underwear, and George Bernard Shaw was very outspoken proponent of the need for all of us to be wearing this particular type of underwear. So this one little clue allows us to construct a whole picture of why Eustace Clarence Scrubb, the protagonist subsense of the whole story, is as mixed up and screwed up as he is at the beginning of the story. So this is Lewis telling us that these wacky ideas of George Bernard Shaw and the Fabian Socialists lead to maladjusted people, and particularly maladjusted children who do not understand reality because they have not been exposed to it in the fullest metaphysical, spiritual understanding of the word.
Yes, indeed. And his parents are, he calls them by their first names as well. Was that a common occurrence?
Yeah, I mean, we see this goes right back in many ways to much before George Bernard Shaw to people such as William Godwinson, William Godwin, the atheist philosopher at the end of the 18th century, so 100 years earlier, and his wife Mary Wollstonecraft, who was an early advocate of what we would now call radical feminism. And they were opposed to marriage. They were opposed to the institution of marriage. They were opposed to the patriarchy that institution imposed, as they would put it. So all these things have come to bitter, cankered fruition in our own time. But certainly, the idea of fatherhood and motherhood, so therefore their children calling them father or mother, would be indicative of somehow signing into adhering to this patriarchal understanding of the family. So no, they're just friends, right? They just call us by our first names. And of course, what the consequence of that is this absolute mess of a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb. And I would say one thing here, there are certain works of literature that are memorable, amongst other things, for the glorious opening line. So we think of A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. We think of The Hobbit. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Right. These are very memorable first lines. But the first line of the Voyage of Dawn Treader, I think, is equally memorable. If I can remember the whole thing now, there was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. Now that's a great, funny first line. He's obviously got a pretty ugly name. I apologise by any of your listeners whose names are Eustace Clarence Scrubb, or any combination thereof. I actually don't mind the name Eustace, but the three of them together, and it's a bit of a clunky, not very aesthetically pleasing combination. But the key word in that sentence is almost deserved it, because he's a maladjusted, badly behaved boy. But the reason he's maladjusted and badly behaved is because of his maladjusted and badly behaved parents. That's why he almost deserves it, because in actual fact, if it wasn't for his upbringing, he would not be the Eustace Clarence Scrub that we're introduced to at the beginning of the story. In other words, he's a product of bad education, bad parenting, and bad philosophy.
Indeed. And and if would you say, or do you think Lewis would say that his parents deserved their names? Because he's like, he's a product of them, but they produced him. They have taught him. They have treated him not like a son, apparently, but more, like a I don't know, like a hanger on. Someone who just happens to be with them.
Yeah, in fact, they don't want him to be an inconvenience. They send him off to school, and that they certainly don't believe in self-sacrificial love, laying down their lives for others. But I would say one thing about that. Of course, they're off stage. We never actually meet them. They're named at the beginning, and we never see them again. And we have to be a little bit careful about judging them, because we don't know anything about them. For all we know, they may be maladjusted and poorly behaved, because they also have maladjusted and poorly behaved parents. The tragedy is that abusive parenting leads to abusive children. Those who are abused become abusive, and that's counterintuitive, because you think if you were treated with cruelty when you were young, you would not want to treat others with cruelty. But in actual fact, you become so messed up that what is pathological and even psychotic becomes normal, because for you it was normal, right? It becomes normative. So it's difficult to judge other people unless we know their backstory, and as we don't know the backstory of his parents, we can't necessarily judge them personally. But what we can do, and what we're called to do, and what Lewis wants us to do, is to judge the ideas that lead to destructive behavior, or justify destructive behavior. And certainly the ideas of Friedrich Nietzsche as manifest in the ideas of George Bernard Shaw and the Fabian Socialists, of which Eustace Clarence Scrubb's parents are the representatives in the story. These are certainly bad ideas, and as we know, bad ideas have bad consequences. Eustace Clarence Scrubb is the bad consequence.
Indeed. Now, Edmund and Lucy have been basically sent to stay with Eustace and his family because their parents are off in America, and Peter is with the professor, who has been downsized. Basically, his house has been downsized, and Susan is in America as well. So Lucy and Edmund have basically gotten the bad end of the stick. They have to go to live with Eustace, who they can't stand, and that's sort of the beginning of the story. That's the catalyst for this story into Narnia. Now, I think the entering into Narnia through the painting is one of the more odd entrances into Narnia compared to the previous books. We have in the first book with the older people, with the professor, basically. I can't remember what his name is. Diggory, right? Diggory goes in with magical rings. The four Pevensey children in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe go in.
Right, sorry, I thought you were talking about Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's Uncle Andrew in The Magician's Nephew.
Oh yeah, well no,
Professor Diggory Kirk is the professor in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was talking about that.
Oh, okay. I was getting confused, because obviously the order in which the books are often read are not the same order in which they were written, and so it all gets a bit confusing. Sorry, I'm sorry to be the sower of confusion there. Let's backtrack.
Well, it's okay. I think I said it in a way that was confusing, because I was thinking of the professor because I wanted you to remind me the name of Diggory, but he grows up to be the professor.
Right.
That's why. Yeah. Anyway, so Diggory comes in through the ring with the rings, and the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. They come through the wardrobe. Then they get summoned by the horn in Prince Caspian, and then there's no entrance into Narnia in The Horse and His Boy. But this one, there's not really an explanation of why they go through this painting. Do you think that's purposeful? Do you think that's there's a reason for that? Why he didn't have a main reason for bringing them in?
Well, I think that's a great question. I do think, of course, that Lewis has the challenge every time he writes a Narnia story. As you say, in The Horse and His Boy, he doesn't, because the Pevensey children are already there. But generally speaking, he has the challenge of explaining how the children leave our world and end up in Aslan. So he uses various imaginative devices. So you might see it as contrived, and it possibly could be seen as contrived. But I think that I would be tempted to say that this has a lot to do with Tolkien's and Lewis's philosophy of art, or philosophy of creativity, that works of art, whether it's narrative art, storytelling, such as the Chronicles of Narnia, or the visual arts, such as a painting, are not just representations of reality, but are themselves, if they're good art, alive. They're living things. That's why if you read a great work of literature and then you reread it, there are things you didn't see the first time. And if it's a really great work of literature, the Bible is the obvious example here. Every time you go back to read it, right, there are new meanings, new layers of understanding, that because the text is not dead, it's a living thing. So great art is alive. So I think in that sense, what he might be saying is that this great work of art about showing a ship on a stormy sea is in some sense aesthetically, creatively, metaphysically alive. It's a living thing, and therefore it's sort of part of the wonder of the story that it should come alive in this other sense, whereby it becomes real water splashing out, and then this has the power to draw them in. And again, what does great art do? Right? If it's great art like Lord of the Rings, we are drawn into Middle Earth. We sort of, in some sense, we are there, right? We lose ourselves or find ourselves in our suspension of disbelief. Same thing with Narnia. Same thing with a great work of art. If you spend time in front of a great work of art, whether it's a landscape or portrait or still life, and you can actually become transfixed, transfigured, transformed by the experience of engaging with it, because it's a living thing. So I think that it's appropriate that Lewis can have us drawn into a work of art, into its reality. And that's what we see happening in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. We're drawn through the painting into the reality which the painting itself is presenting to us.
Do you think it's also sort of connected very much to the fact that they're not there to save Narnia? They're not there to defeat any big enemy in the way that they have been previously. They've been called in to solve a problem necessarily, and in this case, it seems like it's more. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is an adventure to understanding more so than a conquest or a restoration. I mean, though there are parts of that in the book, but for them, that's not really how it's seen. They really are like they're drawn to it as well. They want to go back to Narnia. Do you think it's more of a almost wish fulfillment?
Well, I'm not comfortable with phrases like wish fulfillment, because it reminds me too much of people like Sigmund Freud. In other words, that it's self delusion. Ultimately, no, I would say it's true desire rather than wish fulfillment. In other words, that all of us are made in the image of God, and therefore we are not, as St. Augustine reminds us, we're not going to be at rest until we rest in him. We're going to be restless souls until we find our rest in God. So we are attracted to the divine. We are attracted to goodness, truth, and beauty, because they are manifestations of the divine. So what we see in the Voyage of Dawn Treader is this journey east ad orientem, towards the east, and again traditionally in Christian symbolism, that we face the east in prayer because that is where God will return to us from the east. So that's why Catholic churches are built ad orientem, towards the east, facing the east. That's why the altar faces the east. That's why the priest faces the east, at least in traditional liturgy. That's why the congregation also faces the east. Everybody is oriented, and it's appropriate. The word we have in the English language, orientation, comes from the Latin word oriens, which means east. Okay, so the whole of the novel of the Voyage of Dawn Treader is facing east. There's a great mystical significance to this facing east and moving east, and of course coming to a consummation, really a sort of a revelation, an apocalypse at the end, an epiphany, where they are given a revelation of who God is, as both the lamb and the lion, and so on the edge, at least, of Aslan's country. They make at least the hinterlands of heaven at the end. So it's a journey towards the divine. It's a journey towards paradise.
Indeed. Thank you. True desire is very good. A very good word for it. I'll have to remember that. Now I see the two purposes of the voyage. You can see, at least from the character's perspective, they meet Caspian on the boat, and they learn about what he's trying to accomplish. He's trying to find the missing lords who were loyal to his father and loyal to him, and were sent off by the evil Miraz, as well as Jeep, who wants to find Aslan's country. Do these represent the duality of why we should do things, sort of vocationally and for eternal life?
Yeah, so I think there's lots of things there. Of course, you have the political exiles, and there's a great deal we could say about that. Obviously, in the broadest sense of the word, all of us are political exiles. All right, we're living in a vale of tears, a land of exiles, as the Salve Regina proclaims. So all of us are exiles. But in another sense, that Christians are exiles from secular society, and those who are virtuous are exiles, outlanders, often scorned, outsiders, just purely because they're living counterculturally but trying to live virtuously in a secular environment. So the consequence of that is exile. So the virtuous lords are exiled and apparently lost. So the quest for them is the quest for our lost exiled brothers and sisters. But I think that the other key thing here is Eustace, because it's his journey east. It's his reorientation from looking in the wrong direction to being able to look in the right direction that enables him to grow in virtue and wisdom as the story goes on. And it's all about being oriented towards Christ, oriented towards Aslan. So I think that's the motive force of the journey, of the voyage, of the quest of the Dawn Treader.
But do you think it's vocational and eternal life, like the two sort of connect, the two dualities? Do you see that?
I'm not sure what you mean by duality. Could you clarify that for me, please?
Just that we're out to, that we have two basic goals in life. One is to get to heaven, and one is to fulfill our daily life, to fulfill our role in society properly. Like, being a parent, when you're a kid, being a good kid, being good to your parents. If you become a priest, being a good priest. That's like the daily aspect, sort of, because Caspian represents, when he's looking for the exiles, I see that as him doing his job. Like he's I don't know.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I asked the question, because I'm not sure I agree that that's a duality. I think that the way if you're going to walk to the top of a mountain, let's say that heaven is the top of the mountain, you have to do it one step at a time. So your daily life is the one step at a time. Being true to our vocation, whether it's priesthood or parenthood, or being a child of parents, being true to our vocation is the means by which we achieve eternal life. So there is no duality. One is the means to the end, if you like.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. So one of the things that we get to see with Eustace on the boat is that he's read a number of books. He like knows a bunch of information, but all that information is not really of use.
Yeah, I mean, there's a wonderful provocative phrase of Chesterton's that I like to quote. Chesterton said, "Not facts first, truth first." Now that's provocative, because and that's deliberate. What a paradox is, of course. Chesterton's a master of paradox, as is Jesus Christ. First shall be last, the last shall be first. Doesn't get more paradoxical than that. But Chesterton, as a great master of paradox, it brings together an apparent contradiction that points to a deeper truth. So you say, not facts first, truth first. Well, that's a contradiction, because surely facts are true. That's why they are facts, right? So what Chesterton's doing here is making a distinction between certain types of truth and other types of truth. So in this sense, facts are those things which can be quantified, measured. And remember here, what sort of books is Eustace reading? Where his parents are philosophical materialists, they're atheists. So he has books that are non-fiction, not fiction. They're books of facts, right? Facts or non-fiction. Books of facts. But his eyes are not opened in wonder to those truths that transcend and go beyond the facts. In other words, he has physics, he doesn't have metaphysics, right? So that's what Chesterton's saying. That physics is important, facts are important, but metaphysics is more important. And in fact, it begins with metaphysics. Physics are a consequence of metaphysics, not the other way around, right? God is a metaphysical reality who makes physical things. So that's basically what Lewis is getting at there, is that Eustace, it's not Eustace Scrubs is ignorant in the sense of being illiterate and not reading. The problem is he's ignorant because of the sorts of things that he's reading that do not allow him to see the fullness and the breadth and depth of reality, which is not just factual but metaphysically truthful.
He's feeding his brain with basically things with facts, but he doesn't know how to deal with them. He doesn't know how to actually use them for the benefit of anything.
There are two particular examples that come to mind from the book here that I'd like to illustrate this. First of all, that he's interested in beetles, insects, but he's interested in beetles if they're stuck neat and tidy by a pin onto a board. In other words, not interested in the mystery of the beetle as a living thing that transcends merely the physical atoms which the beetle is. It has something mystical called life. He merely wants to look at the matter, the inanimate matter, the dead thing, not the living thing, right? The physics, not the metaphysics. And the other example, of course, is when he says to Ramandu that in our world, a star is just a ball of flaming gas. And Ramandu, who ironically is, of course, a star in the story, says, even in your world, that's not all it is. So the point is that, yes, in terms of its physical matter, a star is a ball of flaming gas. But a star is also something which allows us to guide ourselves. If we're on a ship called the Dawn Treader, for instance, and we want to keep facing east, well, when the stars will allow us to actually find the true way, they can inspire us to look up, and those great, wonderful words of that greatest philosopher who ever lived. His name is Anonymous, who proclaimed, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Right? That's the beginning of wisdom. We look up, above all shadows rise the sun, says Samwise Gamgee. If you don't look up, you can't know that. And you look up and you wonder, right? And that in other words, the star has the power to enable us to come more fully alive through the sense of wonder. There's a life to it beyond the fact it's a ball of flaming gas. So again, Eustace Clarence Scrub only knows facts and not truth.
He takes the longest time to figure out that he's not in our world. He's always every place they stop, he's looking for the British consulate. He's trying to like get back, and this seems to be caused also by his his materialism, his atheistic materialism. He can't bring himself to believe what they've been telling him has any merit.
Well, he can't believe it without having a radical conversion of philosophy, because for him, one of my favorite definitions of atheism comes from Brideshead Revisited, Evelyn Waugh's novel, where Charles Ryder turns his back on Brideshead, and Brideshead, the house in the story, is symbolic of Christ. Well, who's the bride's head? The bridegroom. All right. So when he's turning his back on Brideshead for what he thinks is the last time, this thing which is metaphysically, mystically the church, he says, henceforth I will believe only in 3 dimensions perceived with my 5 senses. That is an absolute reduction of what atheism is in essence, right? There's nothing but 3 dimensions which we perceive with our 5 senses. Don't look for any reality outside of that, because it doesn't exist. Well, if that's Eustace Clarence Scrub's a philosophy that he's learned from his materialistic parents, other worlds can't exist. They're impossible. He can't be anywhere but in our world, because our world is all there is. So, of course, he can't. It does not compute to him. He could possibly be in another dimension, or another space, or another world, because such things do not exist and cannot exist. And so eventually, as part of his conversion, of course, he comes to terms with the fact that he was wrong.
Indeed. One of their stops in the journey is at the Lone Islands. And at the Lone Islands, they learned that slavery has basically been reinstituted. They're basically a major part of the slave trade to Calormen, sort of the pagan-esque society of Narnia. And the governor has not been basically paying the tribute to Narnia for a long time. And Caspian arrives, basically. I mean, he gets put into slavery too, and then released by one of the lords that they find. And part of the essence of what sort of that's focused on in the book is the bureaucracy that has basically ensured the continuation of slavery, as well as a sort of how they rationalize their independence from Narnia. What do you make of that?
Well, there's a great deal of political philosophy in that, and Lewis is a genius in all sorts of directions, and this is an example of it. Because first of all, slavery is very economically efficient. If the purpose of the economy is efficiency, then slavery, certainly, if you've got free labor that you can do what you like with, you have to pay a salary to, or give any other pensions to, or anything like that. Of course, it's economically efficient, unless, of course, you happen to be one of the slaves. not very good if you're one of the slaves, but if you're a slave owner, then it's very, very good for you. Now, slave owners come in various different forms. So obviously, we think of the one who owns chattel slavery, right? It's bought slaves. But when these stories have been written, we've just recently seen the fall of the Third Reich, of the Nazis. And Joseph Stalin is still in power, an old man in the Soviet Union, and we have a whole nation of slaves. In this case, there are slaves to a huge bureaucracy. Hence the bureaucracy here, right? Where the party system under communism creates this huge party bureaucracy where you have to be a party member to be able to do anything. And it's layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of bureaucracy, which makes it impossible to get to the leader because there are so many layers to get through before you get to him. It's only the inner sanctum, or the inner very much non-sanctum, that surrounds him, that actually has any access to him. So we see, if you like, in this depiction of the politics of the Lone Islands, a depiction not merely of the obvious, right, the old imperialism and slave owning of the previous century, but the slavery caused by communism at the time that he's writing this. And I would even project it beyond that, you know, to the globalist world in which we live now, where all the power is in the hands of global corporations, global elites, and that the ordinary people are effectively powerless in the presence of that, and democracy is now becoming, in consequence, something of a sham. And we are all, in some sense, slaves to this new globalist world order. So, you know, I think there's something very applicable to this little small, rather pathetic government on a lone island out in the middle of nowhere, if you like, in Narnia, as a metaphor, an image of all sorts of other very real political philosophies and their consequences in our world.
Indeed. There are two things, or two things that it reminded me of that I don't think Lewis was writing about, but I feel that is very applicable for the story. I mean, some of the things when the governor's confronted with the king, with Caspian, asking him questions about why this, why that, he's like, it's not in the minutes, you'll have to bring it up at the next council meeting. It reminds me of a show called Yes, Prime Minister.
Oh yes, very good.
Like, just the bureaucracy has basically control of the government. It controls the ministers, and nothing is ever achieved that they don't want to be achieved by bureaucratic means. Was that a concept at the time in Lewis's time, a view of bureaucracy of the current government, or was that would that just come later?
Absolutely. So immediately after World War II in the UK, the Labour government was elected in 1945, and there's something I think called the Beaver Plan. But this basically is all about the government in a bureaucratic way taking over the running of the economy largely, and so this was very much in the news, and Lewis would certainly have been opposed to this at the time he's writing or working on the Chronicles of Narnia. The Catholic poet Roy Campbell wrote a short poem about this particular policy report by the socialist government, and he invented a word for it, which I think sums it up: fasci-democratism. So you've got fascism, democracy, Bolshevism, all combined here in a new form of totalitarian slavery, and that's what I think a lot of people were fearful, was that the England in turning to socialism was going to be making the same mistake that the Soviet Union had made, and the Nazis. I mean, let's not forget that the communists are international socialists. The Nazis are national socialists, but the word Nazi comes from National Socialisten. So this idea that England is now also embracing socialism would have been something which would have filled Lewis with dread. And I think that we see elements of that in the way that he depicts the governor of the Lone Islands.
Yeah, if you want to see bureaucracy work and satirized, watch that show. I think it's. Would you recommend it?
Yeah, I was about to say that. Thank you for mentioning that, and I would also recommend it for your viewers. So the original series was Yes, Minister, And then the minister becomes prime minister. So the next series is yes, prime minister, and it really does. And Margaret Thatcher, apparently, it was her favourite sitcom. And she laughed, but then said, "But it's funny, but it's also dreadfully true to reality." In other words, it's satire at its best because it reflects the wickedness and evil in society, albeit making us laugh when it doesn't.
Awesome. Yeah, indeed. The second thing that the Lone Islands government situation reminds me of is Blessed Karl of Austria when he returned to Hungary to try and reclaim his throne from Admiral Horthy, who had basically sort of set himself up as regent without any authority to do so. And basically, Karl arrives and many people don't know who he don't know that he's coming. He surprises them, but he in his case he's basically turned away and has to go. This is very opposite to that. Caspian arrives and he has truly taken the place by storm, but only because the governor thinks that he has a much larger army.
Yeah, I think, well, there's all sorts of reasons here, on a purely pragmatic level, that basically the world was against the sanctity and sanity of Blessed Karl of Austria. You know, that if they'd listened to him, World War One would have ended much sooner. If they'd listened to him, it would have ended much more peacefully and much more justly. If they listened to him, there would not have been probably the rise of the Nazis, and there probably would not have been World War Two. But the point is that Blessed Karl of Austria found himself as persona non grata, as an outsider, as one that none of the governments, the secular government, Caesar basically treated the Christian ruler with contempt, and that's why Blessed Karl found himself out in the cold following World War One. So I'm not sure how well the parallel works, but certainly with Prince Caspian, who is unlike Blessed Karl, the true ruler, he uses courage. And the thing about decadence is it doesn't take much for it to capitulate. So, for instance, Lenin, the leader of the Russian Revolution, said that advance on all fronts. Where you encounter steel, withdraw. Where you encounter mush, advance. So, of course, the Prince Caspian, being a good strategist, realized that beneath the surface of this bureaucratic edifice of the Lone Islands was nothing but decadence. His advisors are all effete, dandified. The soldiers clearly don't know how to use their weapons. They never had to. They just stand around. They're out of shape. And so he just said, look, we're not encountering steel here. We're encountering mush. Let's just advance and see what sort of resistance is put up. And the answer, of course, is none.
Indeed, and I think that's the key difference between the Karl and Caspian. Not they had the same mentality, but he didn't encounter as much decadence in Hungary.
No, and certainly not much. I mean, he had all of the secular power of Caesar against him. He had anything but mush. He had nothing. He was surrounded by heartless steel on all sides.
Yeah. Now let's get to Eustace's conversion. Eustace has a very greedy moment on one of the islands in which he finds lots of gold, and he begins to take that gold, and eventually he turns into a dragon. He turns into what he is on the inside becomes what he is on the outside, and eventually he has to become more human in his time as a dragon in order to de-dragonify him, be de-dragonified by Aslan. So
absolutely. And so, yeah, this is absolute more genius on the part of C.S. Lewis, of course. we're reminded, perhaps, and I'm sure Lewis would have been reminded by and inspired by the dragon sickness in The Hobbit, because Tolkien and Lewis were great friends, and I would also suggest that maybe the character of Gollum in the Lord of the Rings, that the Gollum becomes on the outside what all of us are on the inside if we Gollumize ourselves by becoming possessed by our possessions. So the possessiveness, the demonic danger of possessiveness is that the possessor becomes possessed by their possessions, and that's what the dragon sickness is in The Hobbit. That's the Gollumization of Gollum in the Lord of the Rings, and it's the dragonification, if you like, of Eustace in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Is that they look externally what they already are internally.
Exactly. And what do you make of sort of the way he has to sort of communicate with Lucy and the others to sort of convince them that he is Eustace? He has to basically lower himself. Well, he has to bring himself down to size. Actually, he's considered himself very high and mighty over his cousins, and now he has to bring himself to become useful as the dragon.
Yeah, and the irony there is now, of course, there's all sorts of ironies, and great literature is full of ironies. Now, for the first time, he does actually have the power to impose his will upon the others. But before, when he thought he was superior and wanted to impose his will upon the others, he was actually powerless to do so because he was not physically able. Now, as a dragon, he's physically able to impose his will, but he's no longer wants to impose that will because that will is no longer his. In other words, he's no longer the wicked Eustace. There's a real transformation that's taking place here because he feels, first of all, prior to all this, he feels first of all the horror that he's now a dragon, right? And then the loneliness because there are no other dragons and he doesn't want to mix with dragons anyway, and he can't mix with people because he's a dragon. So he feels this sense of isolation, alienation, exile, and this real utter dejection and loneliness. And what he needs in that situation is love. And where he gets it from, and it's quite interesting, is we're not really, Lewis is a bit ambivalent in the way he words it, as to whether the first person who recognizes that the dragon is in fact Eustace, whether it's Lucy or whether it's Edmund. And this is interesting because we see this going back to Prince Caspian, where you have this image where it's faith in Aslan that actually allows them to see him. So Lucy, of course, that her name looks light, Latin for light. She sees because she has this open-hearted, wondrous faith in Aslan. So that's how she manages to see. But Edmund, of course, sees because he is the prodigal son. He is the sinner who knows the consequences of pursuing prideful desire. So in the sense that it takes one to know one. So we can say in some sense that Lucy sees through her innocence, whereas Edmund sees through his experience. So the wise person doesn't have to put their hand in the fire to realize that it burns. But if we're not wise, we do put our hands in the fire, we know that it burns. So either way, the wisdom is acquired. So we have this wisdom of innocence and this wisdom of experience. Lucy has the one and Edmund has the other. And we're not really sure which of those forms of wisdom acknowledges that Eustace is actually the dragon, or the dragon is Eustace, I should say, because of course the important thing is that the person is Eustace, right? In terms of this is also important for us to get straight what Lewis is doing philosophically here. There is our substantial reality, that which we are, and there's the accidental aspects of who we are. So, that I am a human person, I happen to be living in South Carolina, right? But the latter is an accident because I would be the same human person if I lived in Michigan, right? So the accidental and the substantial. So this is what we need to understand with Eustace, is it's Eustace, right? He no longer looks like a little boy; he looks like a dragon, but he's still Eustace. And it's Lucy and or Edmund, or both of them, very soon, one after the other anyway, that recognize he's not a dragon, he's a human person. And once he's a human person, it doesn't matter what he looks like, right? And it doesn't matter. So again, all sorts of manifestations. A child in utero doesn't look like a baby after about 2 months, right? But it's that child in utero is fully a human person. What he looks like at that particular moment is accidental. So that's very important. So in substance, in essential reality, Eustace is still Eustace. The outward accidental manifestation, he's a dragon. So it's that personhood, that essential substantial reality of who Eustace is, that Edmund and Lucy acknowledge and recognize and love him, not as a dragon, but as a boy.
That's beautiful, and something that most people probably won't think about necessarily when they're going through it, but it's a great thing, a great aspect to think about. Now, Aslan basically brings him out of his dragonness. He basically descales him. He takes away his scales and return, and it's a painful but a very relieving process. In some ways, it is sort of his own sort of crucifixion of some kind that peels away his the scales of his former self.
Yeah, absolutely. Two things are necessary for his being restored to the dignity of his human personhood. Well, no, he doesn't lose that. For his healing, two things are necessary for his healing, for his being healing from the dragon sickness, to use the Tolkien-esque phraseology. And it's very, very important. And let's use a parallel there, actually. The reason that Bilbo Baggins has to go on the quest in The Hobbit is because he is suffering from the dragon sickness. It's not just Smaug who has the dragon sickness. Bilbo Baggins has the dragon sickness. What is the dragon sickness? It's being possessed by our possessions. Bilbo Baggins, we told right at the beginning of that story, in the hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, and it's not a smelly, damp hole with worms. It's a hobbit hole. And what does that mean? It means comfort. Okay, so Bilbo Baggins is a creature of comfort, addicted to the creature comforts. He's possessed by his possessions, which is why Gandalf says that going on the adventure would be good for him if he survives. In other words, it's perilous, dangerous, he could die, but he needs to do it because he needs to be liberated from his possessions by leaving his comfort zone and embracing danger. But the key thing is, so embracing danger is embracing suffering, all right? But he has to freely choose to do so. Gandalf can't grab him by the scruff of the neck and drag him out of his hobbit hole and say, you're going on this adventure whether you like it or not. No, Bilbo has to freely choose the path of suffering, the adventure. And exactly the same thing with Eustace, right? The two things necessary are it's going to hurt, right? The suffering is unavoidable, right? The cross is unavoidable. But you have to willingly embrace that suffering. You have to willingly take up that cross. So Eustace has to want, and Aslan is very clear about this. He can't, Aslan says, I can't remove the dragon skin from you unless you want me to. So the first thing is that is Eustace has to desire, in other words, has to freely choose to embrace the suffering that's necessary for the restoration of his health.
Indeed, and Edmund is the one that sees him first after, and and they sort of have a heart to heart about the fact that Edmund was the Judas. He was the traitor, and he knows very well what it's like. So they sort of, he's kind of the perfect person to meet Eustace, no longer dragonified.
Yeah, exactly. And it takes knowledge of the plank in our own eyes before we can even think about looking at the moat in anybody else's. So the fact that Edmund and Eustace are now very aware that they have no right to judge anybody else because they've been walking around in the past with huge planks in their eyes and prevented them from being able to see. So that leads to humility. It's the humility of the prodigal son after he returns home. And that's what we see both in Edmund and the lessons he learns from the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the lessons that Eustace learns in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
Exactly. And now he's sort of he's not completed his journey by any stretch of the imagination, because he has a few more stories to be told with him, but he has definitely progressed from the Fabian Socialist to the Catechumen, and his sort of descaling is sort of his baptism.
Yeah, it's baptism. That's a very good way of putting it. It is a baptism, but again, Lewis makes it clear that Eustace is still a work in progress. He doesn't become a saint, just because he's been baptized, just because he's embraced Aslan, embraced Christ. He's still a work in progress. He still needs to continue with the journey, right? The journey east is still carrying on. He's just now joining. He's oriented in the same direction as everybody else. He's not facing in the wrong direction. He's facing in the right direction, and that, of course, is crucial. Literally in the sense of the word crucial, cross, right? He's now taken up his cross and facing the same way as everybody else in the pilgrimage towards the east, ad orientem. So it's important, but he still is a work in progress. He's still Eustace, a miserable sinner, but at least he now knows he's a miserable sinner, and that's the beginning of wisdom.
Indeed. Well, Joseph, thank you for coming on to discuss Voyage of the Dawn Treader. It was lovely talking to you, and I hope everyone enjoyed the episode. Again, Joseph Pearce's website, if you want to check out his work, and I encourage all of you to do so, is jpearce.co. You can also find his work at the St. Austin Review.org. And in the description is also the playlist of the previous episodes in this series. So I hope everyone, if they're new to this, please check that out as well to get the full aspects of what we've done, full content that we've done before. Joseph, anything to say before we go?
Not only keep up the good work you're doing, you're eloquent and you're lucid, and I find that I enjoy conversations much better if the person I'm conversing with knows what they're talking about. You clearly do, and so it's a joy and a pleasure. So keep up what you're doing.
Thank you. You're very kind, and God bless everyone.